In the remote stretches of southern Siberia, nestled within the vast taiga forests and surrounded by the timeless silence of snow-covered peaks, lies a place few have heard of, the Khamar-Daban mountain range. Isolated, mysterious, and hauntingly beautiful, this rugged terrain forms a natural barrier between the vastness of Russia and the gentle lapping shores of Lake Baikal, the world's deepest and oldest freshwater lake. It's the kind of landscape that swallows sound and light, where clouds hang low over tree-covered ridges and the wind sings through the valleys like a warning. In this stark wilderness, in the summer of 1993, an inexplicable tragedy unfolded, one that remains unsolved to this day. 6 experienced hikers died under bizarre and terrifying circumstances. Their behavior in their final hours was described as panicked, erratic, and inexplicable, more fitting for victims of some psychological horror than for mountaineers well-trained in survival and composure. Only one person survived, Valentina Utochenko, a woman whose chilling testimony is all that remains to explain what happened during those fateful days. Her survival and account offer disturbing insight, but ultimately raise more questions than they answer. What caused 6 people to die in the prime of their health in a group led by a seasoned instructor? Why did their deaths mirror the kind of panic and gruesome physical trauma seen in tales of supernatural horror or covert military experiments? This is the story of the Khamar-Daban incident. A case that still echoes with confusion, dread, and the eerie silence of a mystery that refuses to be solved. The group that set out on that ill-fated expedition was not a collection of inexperienced wanderers. It consisted of 7 people in total, 6 hikers and their instructor, Lyudmila Korovina. She was not just any guide. Lyudmila was a respected and seasoned survival expert, one who had led numerous treks into the wilderness. Her experience was not just extensive, it was formidable. She had trained many young hikers in the art of surviving the harsh Russian wilderness and was known for her no-nonsense discipline, her love of nature, and her ability to remain calm in extreme situations. On that August day in 1993, the group was composed of young, physically fit individuals, mostly in their late teens and early 20s. These were not casual hikers. They were hand-picked by Lyudmila herself, a tight-knit team she trusted and had worked with before. Valentina Utochenko was among them, a 17-year-old girl eager for adventure, shaped by previous excursions and trained to withstand tough conditions. She was physically prepared, mentally fortified, and, as events would prove, destined to become the lone voice left to recount what happened. They planned a hike that would traverse the ridgelines of the Khamar-Daban range. Though remote and demanding, the route was not considered unusually dangerous for someone of Lyudmila's caliber. The group was well-equipped and had food, gear, and survival tools. They departed from the town of Lyudmila, a small but busy settlement on the southern tip of Lake Baikal, with optimism and excitement. The weather was mild, the air smelled of pine and moisture, and the mountains loomed like quiet sentinels above them. At the same time, a second group of hikers led by Korovina's daughter was also on a trek in the region, though following a different route. The 2 groups were meant to meet up after completing their respective routes. That meeting, of course, would never happen. The hike started smoothly. Spirits were high. The forest floor was soft beneath their boots, and the landscape opened before them in breathtaking vistas. The group moved with a rhythm, steady, synchronized, efficient. On the 4th day, they reached the slopes of Mount Trans, a point in the journey that marked a shift from manageable trekking into more rugged and less forgiving terrain. That night, they made camp at a spot near a stream, surrounded by dense forest. The trees swayed in the wind, casting elongated shadows in the firelight. There was no sign of what was to come, no strange sounds, No ominous omens, just the usual crackling of flames, the smell of pine smoke, and distant animal calls that are common in the taiga. But what happened the next morning would change everything. August 5th, 1993. The sun had barely crept above the horizon when the tranquility of the camp was shattered by chaos. According to Valentina, it started suddenly and without warning. One of the hikers, Alexander, began foaming at the mouth. His eyes widened in horror as he clutched his throat and stumbled around the campsite, convulsing uncontrollably. His skin turned pale, his limbs shook violently, and within moments he collapsed to the ground. Before the group could react, Tatiana, another member, began screaming. Not out of fear, but in pain. She clutched her head, then her chest, her voice turning raw and desperate. Blood began to pour from her eyes and nose. Her body thrashed, convulsed. She collapsed, shaking on the ground beside Alexander. Panic surged through the camp. Then came Lyudmila, the strong and calm leader. But even she was not immune. She reportedly began to scream, clawing at her throat as if suffocating. Valentina could only watch in shock as her instructor, the rock of their group, fell to her knees, crying out in agony, then collapsing forward into the mossy earth, lifeless. One by one, the remaining group members succumbed to the same mysterious fate. Their final moments were terrifying and violent, bodies twisting unnaturally, eyes wide with fear, blood seeping from orifices, and screams that echoed off the trees. Valentina stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was unfolding before her eyes. She described it as a scene from a nightmare. Surreal, brutal, and otherworldly. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know what was happening. She only knew one thing. She had to run. Amid the horror, the screaming, the bodies contorting in death throes, Valentina Utochenko did the only thing her instincts screamed at her to do. She ran. The forest swallowed her almost instantly. Behind her, she left a scene she would never be able to forget. 6 of her companions, once laughing and singing, now lying motionless in the grass, their bodies twisted and covered in blood. The sounds of their suffering echoed in her ears long after the forest around her fell into silence. She didn't know what she was running from. There was no obvious enemy, no beast, no visible threat. Just death, sudden, inexplicable death that had devoured her entire group in mere minutes. She ran for days. With no food and very little water, she wandered through the unforgiving taiga, her legs scratched by branches, her mind fraying at the edges. Sleep became a dangerous luxury. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blood, heard the screams, felt the forest tilt around her. But the Khamar-Daban mountains were relentless. Even in summer, temperatures dipped to dangerous levels at night, and the forest floor was damp, cold, and teeming with insects. Valentina had to fight every minute to survive. She scavenged berries, drank from streams, and used every ounce of survival training Lyudmila had drilled into her. She wrapped herself in leaves at night to preserve heat. She hid under thick ferns during rainstorms. Each morning she awoke disoriented, convinced she wouldn't make it another mile, but somehow she kept moving. Days blurred together. Was it 3? 4? She couldn't tell anymore. Then, on the 4th day after fleeing the site of the tragedy, Valentina stumbled upon a camp, a group of kayakers near a river. Exhausted and barely able to speak, she collapsed into their arms, her voice hoarse, her eyes wide with a trauma too deep for words. Her clothes were tattered, her face was scratched and pale. She looked like someone who had survived a war. Through fits of crying and shock, she managed to tell them enough. There had been a group. Now they were all dead. The authorities were notified immediately. A search party was organized, and within days, the gruesome scene Valentina had described was found, exactly as she had said. 6 bodies lay in the grass on a mountain slope near their final campsite. Their positions were strange. Some appeared to have fallen mid-step. Others lay on their backs with their arms twisted, mouths open in frozen screams. The expressions on their faces were described as unnaturally contorted, as if frozen in terror. The decomposition had begun, but not enough to mask what had happened. There was no sign of a struggle, no animal tracks, no external injuries beyond minor scratches and bleeding from the eyes and ears. Their clothes were intact, their gear untouched, but there was one disturbing detail no one could overlook. Lyudmila Korovina's body was different. It showed signs of exposure, but also unusual bruising, as though she had tried to fight against something unseen in her final moments. Her face was described as darkened. Some witnesses later used the term blackened, and foam was found at her mouth, suggesting she, too, suffered internal distress, possibly convulsions. Whatever happened, it had hit them all at once, like a sudden wave of terror that overwhelmed the group in mere minutes. There was no time to escape, no time to call for help. Only Valentina had survived, and even she had no explanation. Only memories of fear, confusion, and inexplicable death. The incident was reported in local media, but received little national attention. After all, it was the early 1990s. Post-Soviet Russia was still reeling from the collapse of the USSR, and countless regions were in turmoil. Resources were thin, priorities were elsewhere. The authorities launched an investigation, but it was brief and inconclusive. The cause of death listed for most of the hikers was hypothermia, a common explanation in hiking fatalities. But that raised more questions than answers. How could 6 physically fit, well-equipped hikers, led by a highly experienced survivalist, all succumb to hypothermia in August, during the middle of the day? And what about the symptoms? The foaming at the mouth, the bleeding, the convulsions? These were not signs typically associated with hypothermia. They pointed to something more sinister, something environmental, or chemical, or even biological. The investigation made no official mention of poison, environmental toxins, or chemical weapons. No toxicology report was released to the public. The case was quietly closed, and the Khamar-Daban tragedy was largely forgotten, a chilling footnote in the long history of Siberia's mysteries. But not for those who heard Valentina's story. Despite the case being closed by authorities, the mystery of the Khamar-Daban hiking tragedy refused to die. The details were too strange, the deaths too sudden, the survivors' account too vivid and chilling to be ignored. Whispers began to spread. Locals, hikers, amateur investigators, and internet sleuths began picking apart the case, trying to make sense of what had happened on that mountain in 1993. Theories multiplied, each more unsettling than the last. One of the most widely discussed explanations is the possibility of toxic gases, specifically from a sudden release of natural geologic emissions. The Khamar-Daban range sits in a region of geothermal activity. Beneath the Earth's crust, in some places, lie pockets of hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, or carbon dioxide. Odorless, invisible gases that can seep to the surface and kill silently. A freak release of such gases could explain the sudden collapse of the group. Carbon monoxide, for instance, binds to hemoglobin in the blood and prevents oxygen from being delivered to tissues. Victims often show signs of confusion, hallucination, and physical collapse. Hydrogen sulfide can cause violent nausea, loss of consciousness, convulsions, and death. All symptoms consistent with Valentina's account. But this theory raises troubling questions. If a gas leak occurred, why wasn't Valentina affected? Why were the symptoms among the others so varied? Some bleeding, some convulsing, some simply falling over dead? And why has no similar gas emission ever been reported in that region before or since? During the final years of the Soviet Union, the vast wilderness of Siberia became a testing ground, a place where the government could experiment with technology, often far from public view. After the collapse of the USSR, many military records were destroyed or classified indefinitely. But rumors remained, rumors of chemical and biological weapons tested in remote regions. Could the Khamar-Daban hikers have accidentally wandered into one such area? One theory suggests they may have encountered a residual chemical agent, either in the air or on vegetation. The sudden onset of symptoms, screaming, bleeding, convulsions, echoes descriptions of nerve agents such as VX or sarin. These substances can kill within minutes, even seconds after exposure. Some of the hikers' symptoms, frothing at the mouth, muscular rigidity, eye bleeding, are not consistent with hypothermia, but they do match nerve agent exposure. These are chemicals designed not just to kill, but to incapacitate and terrify. If this was the case, it would explain the silence of authorities. A cover-up, a desire to avoid public scrutiny of Soviet-era secrets. Perhaps the lack of detailed autopsy reports wasn't due to incompetence, but because someone didn't want the truth to be known. Still, there's no official evidence to support this. No documents, no military sites listed near the area. But in post-Soviet Russia, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Valentina survived, not because she was stronger or smarter, but because she was the last to be affected. She described how her companions began showing signs of illness and confusion first. She too became ill and disoriented, but eventually regained enough strength to descend the mountain alone. She spent days wandering until finally finding help. Why she survived when all the others died is a question that will likely never have a definitive answer. Was she simply lucky? Or was her slower reaction due to something physiological, genetic immunity, metabolic difference? These are questions no one has thoroughly investigated. She's refused further interviews and avoids public attention, which is her right. But it means the only witness to this tragedy keeps the final pieces of the puzzle locked within her memory. The mountain still waits today. The Khamar-Daban range remains what it's always been. Wild, beautiful, and silent. The site of the tragedy is not marked. There are no warning signs, no monuments, no official acknowledgement that 6 promising lives were lost to something no one could explain.